they are teaching their kids to really be very confused by the color of their skin. And sadly, I won't even begin to tell you the kinds of conversations I've had to have with my daughter now because of what she's hearing in the news and what's happening around her.
Yeah.
And it's not something that any parent should have to deal with. I mean, it's especially at that young of an age. We need to get back to where schools are teaching kids what, like literally how to think, not what to think. Critical thinking, not critical race theory.
Right.
That has no place in schools. It's a legal theory. If you want to do it in colleges, in legal classes, fine. Not for my 6-year-old daughter. Not with her.
Welcome to The Right to Inspire. Journalist and host Sarah Strackhouse has worked at Fox News, the CW, CBS, NBC, and Time Warner cable stations across the country for more than 10 years and is now focused on telling inspiring stories of those dedicated to making change. She's driving the message home that ultimately you have the right, the freedom, and the power to be the change you want to see in the world. You have the right to inspire.
Hey everyone, yes, thanks so much for joining us for The Right to Inspire. We are out of the Real News Communication Network studios here in Dallas, and I'm honored to be joined by Tina Ramirez. She is a congressional candidate for the state of Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here with you, Sarah. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've done so much. You have an incredible past, and I know that you're tackling a lot of the big issues right now in the state of Virginia, trying to get that Republican seat back. And I want to kind of go into all the things you're running on, and I know you're a huge advocate for the conversation about CRT and getting it out of our school systems. But first, I kind of want to talk about your background, because you have done some amazing things. I mean, you've gone to 30 different countries to teach leaders how to defend freedom. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this really comes out of my passion for, I guess, when I was in college, like 20 years ago. So it's been a long journey. I got a chance to work for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and then I was recruited to come work for a congressman in the U.S. Congress. And so I built a bipartisan caucus to defend religious freedom in Congress. So half Republicans, half Democrats, one of the few things they actually worked on together. And I
Which nowadays is shocking.
Which is shocking, yeah, I know. And so I traveled all over the world helping people get out of prison, helping countries work on their constitutions to protect the most basic freedoms, in particular religious freedom. Mm-hmm. And so it was an amazing experience and helping people at their most desperate hour, really. And I worked in a lot of countries that we see in the news today. So Afghanistan was, I think, one of the first countries that I was able to work on a case of a man that was going to be put to death for blasphemy.
Wow.
And so I remember that case, but literally around the world working with people that have where the kind of freedoms that we take for granted so easily in America are a life and death reality for them if they want their freedom of conscience, their freedom of speech, to live according to their own faith and beliefs. It's not a reality for them to fight for. I mean, we saw literally people clinging to their freedom when they were flying out of Afghanistan, and they were holding on to the plane, literally because they knew that without freedom, life is just not worth living. And so, but that's what I've done. And then I started 8 years ago a company called Hardwired, where I've actually been able to go into these countries and develop local leadership so that they are able to embed this idea of religious freedom, of freedom of conscience, of speech, of expression into their own cultures, through their own, through their own belief systems, so that they can defend it for themselves and for others. And so we're working right now in northern Nigeria, where Boko Haram is very active. We trained groups to work together to actually litigate cases for one another. And then in Iraq, I'm actually working with the teachers across Mosul and the Nineveh Plains, which is where ISIS had literally, taken all those people captive and then brainwashed like 600,000 children.
Wow.
So they had taught them to hate and kill people who believe differently. And if left to themselves, they would have become the next generation of ISIS. And when we see what's happening in Afghanistan, I really felt compelled 5 years ago when I went back to Iraq and the genocide had been unraveling, to help these children not lose their dignity and their freedom, find another way. And so we've been in charge of retraining all the teachers in that area to embrace religious freedom for one another. And it's helping them reject violence, reject extremism, and actually set up a bulwark against further extremism in their country so that the people are going to be safe and really break that cycle of conflict. So that's my day job.
Yeah.
That's my passion.
That's all?
Yeah.
That's all you do?
Yes. Well, there's more to it, but yes.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to be able to work with people that, they could only, I feel
only
like,
imagine the freedoms that we have
yeah,
here.
and I feel like as an American, having grown up with the kind of freedom that we do, that the very least we can do is help other people have it too.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of makes you think about, like we were talking about, the freedoms that we have here, and I think that we take for granted. And I think over the last year, with everything that's happened in our country, with COVID around the world, everything like that, I feel like we've started to see some of those freedoms little by little get encroached on. And what are your thoughts on that? And freedom of speech even? I mean, I think cancel culture is so big, and it just snowballs. And I think some people aren't seeing the writing on the wall that these things are happening even here. Obviously not to the extent that it's happening in somewhere like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, or anything like that. But, even here we're seeing those freedoms get encroached on. What are your thoughts there?
We're absolutely seeing our freedoms come under assault here in America. And it's one of the things that motivated me to run for Congress again, because I see these freedoms disintegrating around the world, where people are losing their freedom of speech, of conscience, of expression, of speech. But in America, we don't expect to lose these freedoms. I mean, we have a culture where these freedoms are ingrained in our Constitution, our way of life. And so
that's what our country was founded on.
Exactly. And so over the last year, throughout COVID, when we started seeing churches shut down and other places of worship, where literally people couldn't even go through a drive-through worship service without being ticketed, where they're facing fines in California for worshiping. I mean, worship is one of the most fundamental freedoms that we have, that you don't even lose when you're in prison, because it's what gives you hope in the midst of a crisis. So the very fact that in our own country, where we have inspired this freedom around the world for people to find freedom, that we are now restricting it and treating it worse than going to a liquor store, because that's literally what happened. Is you can go to a liquor store, you can go to a grocery store, but you can't worship. Somehow that's off limits. And it's actually an essential, your freedom of conscience really is your most important human right, in my opinion. And that's why I fought for it around the world, for people that don't have it. Because authoritarian regimes, when they want to take over, they will restrict your conscience first and foremost, above anything. So it's really important that in America we understand, when we see what's happening and we start to push back. I'm very concerned for my daughter in the future that she's going to have here, knowing that what it looks like on the other side, where people don't have these kinds of freedoms. I'm very concerned with the direction of our country and where it's headed, and just the lack of just respect that this is a basic right, that it's not part of the lingua franca anymore in our country. It just doesn't make sense to me how we've gone so far.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about you're a little worried for the future for your daughter. I mean, I'm a new mom, and I keep thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want my kids going to public school and learning X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about, I know we talked about this before, but you have a pretty strong stance on CRT being taught in the schools. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that, and why you're such an advocate for the issues that are there.
What we're seeing in our schools right now is extremely dangerous. I'm the mother of a biracial child. So when my daughter goes to school and we have to contend with her teachers infusing into the classroom these ideas that there's an oppressed class and an oppressor class, and the oppressor class is a certain color. That's so confusing for a child.
Yep.
We train our children, we raise them, regardless of, what your melatonin is.
Right.
We raise them the way Martin Luther King taught us, which is judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Right.
And now they're reversing that, and they're literally telling children to prejudge people based on the color of their skin. This is wrong, it's racist, and it's destructive. It's dividing our homes, it's dividing our families and our communities, and it needs to stop. But it really is part of an agenda, a very liberal, progressive agenda of trying to indoctrinate our kids and divide people and really create racial, instead of class warfare, which is what Marxism was all about, racial warfare, which, we have come so far in America, and it's because our founding fathers gave us these ideals of freedom that we've been able, to even, be in a position where I could marry a black man and have a biracial child, and it's totally normal in society. So the fact that we're reversing those, those advances that we've made, and the respect that we've come to have for people of all different faiths and beliefs and colors is just, it's just destructive, and it's un-American. But we've seen this in Virginia over the past year. Critical race theory has been shoved down our throats. Mostly, I think it's coming out of teachers' colleges and through the teachers' unions with their radical progressive agenda. When you read a lot of the documents about this, it promotes the ideas of Marxism. And as someone who has fought for human rights throughout my career, so for the last 20 plus years.
Across the world.
All over the world in places where they don't have it, for people of all colors,
Yeah.
And faiths.
Yep.
I find this abhorrent because I don't teach those children in Iraq to overcome intolerance and hate and all the things that ISIS taught them by teaching them that there's an oppressor and oppressed class and they need to rise up and overthrow the oppressors and that they need to see everybody associated with them as evil.
Right.
I don't teach them that. I teach them.
Because that's teaching prejudice, essentially.
It is. And I a Yazidi man from Iraq, and many people remember the sex trafficking, the slavery of all of the Yazidi girls. There were 6,000 Yazidi girls who were literally trafficked by ISIS because they were the wrong religion, and ISIS believed that they could destroy them. So they took them and they raped them, they tortured them, they sent them off into slavery. And I remember a Yazidi man and asking him, how do you guys overcome that kind of genocide, that kind of horror of what you just experienced? And he said, Tina, we've been through 73 genocides in our history.
Wow.
And he said, the only way that we overcome it is by forgiveness. If we carried the bitterness and the hatred for the people that were associated with those that oppressed us with us, we would never be able to continue.
And generations later on top of that.
Generations. And what I've done in Iraq in order to help these children overcome that, just the horrors of what they faced, is teaching them, don't judge everyone by what one group did. Learn how to forgive, learn how to recognize the inherent dignity of every person. And that's really what our founding fathers taught us. And these basic rights, these constitutional rights, these human rights are what I've taught around the world and have led people to greater freedom. So what they're doing in our schools by teaching Marxism, which was what led to the Holocaust and the horrors of World War II, is really the antithesis of that. And it's why we've got to fight against it, because I have never seen a country in the world, and I've worked in a lot of authoritarian regimes, that have embraced Marxism and it's ever worked out.
Right.
Or been good for people.
Right, right.
So why in America are we embracing this? But there's another reason I think this is so destructive, and we've seen this in Virginia. The critical race theory ideas are infusing themselves not just in how they're teaching this Marxism to our kids and dividing them. It's also being infused into equity policies in our schools. And so in Northern Virginia, a friend of mine, Asra Nomani, has her son at Thomas Jefferson High School, and he's of Indian Asian background. And our state board of education said, well, we need to lower the standards for blacks and Hispanics because there's not enough of them in these governor schools. That Thomas Jefferson is one of our magnet schools in Virginia. We have like 8 of them. And Thomas Jefferson High School is one of the top 10 schools in the entire country. So he says we need to lower the standards for blacks and Hispanics. I'm Hispanic, my daughter's black, and I personally find that insulting that they think they need to lower the standards for us and then discriminate against Asian students who are doing too well and are a larger percentage of the population of that school. I just find it insulting. Now, I'm not very good at math and science, but my daughter is very good at it. This is a math and science magnet school. And so the fact that they say, no, my daughter, because of the color of her skin, needs you to lower the standards and she's not capable of competing, I just find insulting. And I think any person of color should find insulting. Any American should find insulting, because this is not American.
Right.
I mean, people come to our country because of the opportunities we have to advance and because of the freedoms that we have for economic opportunities and advancement, and being able to go to a school system, a public school system, and compete is one of the most basic things that we do as Americans.
Right, and especially at they're saying this at a magnet school, which is interesting. Where we're already, people are at a higher tier, and to say that, I could completely understand why that would feel insulting. I mean, it is.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't raise your children expecting that that's the kind of America they're going to grow up in, and I think that's what's so frustrating. In this past year, we've seen how the teachers' unions have shut down our schools on their own, really for their own agendas, and we've seen that very clearly. They called critical race theory, Terry McAuliffe in our state tried to call it a right-wing conspiracy, and then the national teachers unions came out and embraced it. This is not a right-wing conspiracy. This is a left-wing conspiracy, if anything. They are pushing this on us, and they're dividing us, and it's just not healthy for our society, for our freedoms. But the woman that I'm running against in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, she took more money than any other person in Congress from the teachers unions.
Wow.
I mean, more than Nancy Pelosi, which is shocking.
That is.
And
oh my gosh.
Virginia is really ground zero for this battle over critical race theory, over these really racist equity policies. I actually helped Asra Nomani file a lawsuit at both the state and the federal level against the racial discrimination, because that's what it is. And Asians deserve better. Every American deserves better. My daughter deserves better. So we've got to be fighting this as parents. I've been helping a lot of the school boards as well in their fight against critical race theory. But this month is September, and I also work with a group called 1776 Action, and they are calling for this month to be called Patriotic Education Month, which I have seen the impact that these ideas of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and so many of our founding fathers have allowed me to fight for and help people find dignity with around the world. That's what we need in America again. We need to fight for our fundamental values and freedoms. We need a month to recognize that and to respect that. So.
Well, and kind of what you're talking about when it comes to fighting back, I've seen a lot of what's been going on at the school districts and a lot of these board meetings, across the country, but specifically I saw it in Virginia. What can parents do at home? What can people in the community do?
So, this is a great question. A good friend of mine here in Dallas actually ran for the school board. I used to work with her as a lawyer at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. She was one of the top lawyers there. Was literally trained by Supreme Court justices, clerked for them. Hannah Smith, she's amazing. And she was fed up. She's like, look, we moved back here so that our kids would go to a school where our values are being taught. And so she actually ran for school board. The most qualified person I've ever met, and is fighting back in her local school board here in Dallas, Texas. Across the country, we've got to be doing that.
Right.
And so
because it's not just happening in liberal places. Here
everywhere.
Here in Texas, which is generally a conservative state, a conservative space, this is happening across the board.
So I grew up in Powhatan, Virginia, which is a small rural community. When I grew up, we didn't even have a McDonald's. So we joke about it, but right now, it's one of 7 counties in Virginia. So Loudoun, Fairfax, Powhatan, and a number of other counties that you've seen all over the news that adopted these racist critical race theory policies. And so they literally had been training their teachers through articles, one of which I read, one of the top article in this inquiry collaborative that they had been training their teachers in, that literally said, we need to uproot the white heterosexual Christian male authority structure within our society. I don't understand how that brings people together.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that's healthy in our society. And
extreme prejudice in the other way that equality is not being found.
No, and I am all for teaching our history.
Yeah.
Every part of it.
But I think that's also an issue, is that it's taught as fact, not as theory.
Right, and what's happening is that they're not teaching history. What they're doing is indoctrinating kids. They're teaching our kids to hate their families. They are teaching their kids to really be very confused by the color of their skin. And sadly, I won't even begin to tell you the kinds of conversations I've had to have with my daughter now because of what she's hearing in the news and what's happening around her.
Yeah.
And it's not something that any parent should have to deal with. It's especially at that young of an age. We need to get back to where schools are teaching kids literally how to think, not what to think. Critical thinking, not critical race theory.
Right.
That has no place in schools. It's a legal theory. If you want to do it in colleges, in legal classes, fine. Not for my 6-year-old daughter. Not with her.
Well, they're at a higher level. They already understand, the history. They've already been taught history, and then they can deduce themselves and understand that as a theory. So that also brings me to another thing. You've had to have these really difficult conversations with your 6-year-old. What advice do you have for parents who might be thinking, okay, my kid is coming home, learning critical race theory, learning all these XYZ things in school. How do you even start that conversation? Or if she comes home and says, okay, Mom, you're the enemy. What is your response?
So there are a lot of great organizations out there, and I would just recommend that parents get plugged into these different groups. So whether it's 1776 Action, Asra Nomani started Parents Defending Education up in Loudoun County, in Fairfax County, and then there's another one called No Left Turn in Education. All of these different groups are working nationally to help parents really defend their fundamental rights, because what it comes down to is that it is a parent's right to monitor and to supervise and to see over their child's education. It's their right. It's not the government's right. Now, in the countries where I've worked around the world, and one of the first countries I remember traveling to was Romania, where the government literally took kids from their homes, put them in orphanages, and said, we are going to raise children. We know how to do it. Now, that's a nanny state and it was completely destructive.
Yeah.
We all know what happened in Romania. It's been a disaster. Those children, I mean, mentally were left behind, and it was so destructive to their health and well-being because of what the government did by creating this nanny state. We do not live in a country founded as a nanny state, and we need to push back because we've got to push back on the government dictating what we can do with our children, what they can be learning. We sent them to school so that our values are reinforced, not undermined, and that's what's happening. So parents really do need to get involved at their local school boards. They need to go to your school board meetings
and learn what's being taught. I think that's also half the battle. Is a lot of parents don't know what's being taught in their schools until a question gets asked.
And over the past year, we've seen it front and center, through COVID with a lot of the remote learning. And so we've seen on Zooms and all of these, literally front and center.
Suddenly parents are overhearing, what?
I was sent so many videos over this past year. One was of a little girl, she was in junior high school, and a little boy who was 8 years old they were showing a video of him, a young Caucasian boy, apologizing to women, to anyone of color, to literally every group possible for being a white male. And I just thought, so if my daughter's sitting in that classroom and she's seeing this, because it's in my school district.
Because he happens to be born white and male.
Caucasian and male. And what does that teach her? And then the kids had to apologize to people of color. And I thought, my poor little girl being in a classroom where that could happen, and it's the school community where she's at right now is predominantly Caucasian, she would be mortified. Now, here's the thing. My daughter her father isn't even from here, America. He's from Africa. So there's nothing to apologize for, number one.
Right.
You want to teach history, teach history. I've raised her to learn history, to love the stories of all of our founding fathers and the people that fought for freedom across our history. But don't teach her to be in a classroom where people are going to prejudge her based on the color of her skin, or she's taught to do that to others. That's just wrong.
Right.
So parents do need to get involved. They need to know what's happening in our schools. We've seen the textbooks and the children's books that are being put into schools are very destructive. There was one that was in another local school district in my community that was teaching them how to hate police officers.
Wow.
This is wrong. Our police defend and protect us. They are here to serve, and they need to be respected by children. I don't want my daughter seeing a police officer and being afraid of him.
Right.
That's not what we need to be teaching our children. They're there to
protect and
safeguard us. And so, it's just everything's been flipped on its head in our schools, and we've got to get up and fight for it. So that's what we're doing across Virginia. When parents in Loudoun County stood up against the critical race theory, they were doxxed. So literally a group of teachers and administrators, publicly paid officials, went on a private Facebook group, and started listing those parents' names, places of their home addresses, their places of work, and doxing them, attacking them.
Wow.
And threatening their livelihoods and their homes. It's going to court, but this is what's happening, and we've got to stand up and fight. And that's why you see this in the news so much in Northern Virginia, because Northern Virginia is a very diverse area. Like I said, there's a huge Asian community. There's so much diversity there, and so people that have actually come from different countries where they didn't have the kind of opportunities we have, especially for excellence in education, and they expect that when they come here, and then to literally have this racist teaching and hatred against them, it's just...
It's got to be shocking.
It's unbelievable. And I think that's why, we saw a woman from China who literally escaped communist China stand up and say, I just escaped a country where these Marxist ideas were destroying people's lives. I don't want that here for my children. Please stop. And I think that pushback has really... exposed a lot of the inadequacies in our education system. But we saw that last year when an education system was tested like it was last year, and it was proven to be failing our children. We do need to take a step back, and instead of digging our heels in and doing the same thing, which is what the Democrats are doing really, and the progressive liberals in our country, we've got to take a step back and say, how can we help our children and the next generation actually have the skills that they need to be innovative, to have the kind of opportunities that we've had. And that's not what's happening with the way that the teachers unions are pushing their ideology and their radical agendas on our families.
Well, and I know this is a huge issue, and I know it's not something that's going to go away overnight, and you're saying that parents need to step up, fight back. What are some of the other top main issues that you're running on and are top of mind?
So, I mean, for people across my district, I think one of the most critical things is education, because their schools were shut down. I'm a single mother, so we had 80% of my county.
And a working single mother.
A working single mother, yes. I travel all over the world. And 80% of our county said we want to go back to school. And then literally 3 weeks before school started, they said, no, we're not going back to school. And then they put kids in school for a few weeks, and then they pulled them back. I was able, fortunately, to find a private school that I was able to put my daughter in. But we need this kind of school choice for every child in our state and our country. Virginia has about 8 magnet or charter schools in our state. They have over 100 in North Carolina and in Maryland. And as you know, Florida is like, just going, has been so forward thinking with charter schools and with magnet schools and with education and school choice. In Virginia, we have 8. We have been controlled by the teachers unions. The woman that I'm running against, literally, like I said, has taken more money than anyone else from these teachers unions. And so I think that the biggest issue in the suburbs, where we've lost so much support in past years for the Republican Party, is that we're seeing that shift now, because parents are very concerned about what's being taught in our schools, but also the fact that these teachers unions are dictating whether our kids can even go to school, and the choices that we as parents have. And
it should be up to the parents.
It should be. As a single parent, my choice was to put her in a public school. I literally moved so that she would go to the particular school in the district I moved to. I mean, I was...
Which I think many people do.
Many people do. That was my school choice. But that was denied to me, and it's denied to a lot of families. And if they really are so concerned about minority communities and lower income minority communities in particular, then why are they denying them their choice too?
Right.
Because those kids have been left behind.
That's where a lot of kids get fed too. That's where they get their meals.
Right. Well, and also are protected from a lot of violence that we're seeing in their communities and at home. And that, I can't tell you the number of psychologists and people I've talked to that have just said, even my daughter's pediatrician that has just said that the challenges to children, the trauma, the mental health issues have just skyrocketed in the last year. So I think school choice is really one of the most important issues. The safety in our communities is second. And so going back to what I had mentioned about the police, the fact that we have this defund the police movement across our country, and we have it in our community in Richmond, Virginia. We saw these riots last year. We saw just our state government try to really strip away the ability of law enforcement to do their job and to keep our community safe. And so crime is skyrocketing. We're seeing it even in the suburbs where people move so that they would be safe. And it's a huge concern for families. And then I think, inflation, we're seeing this at the gas pump. We're seeing it at the grocery store. It is it's
astronomical.
So much. And it's interesting because one of the first, we did a social media post through my campaign, and it was really simple. It just said, how much are you paying for gas? Hashtag Biden economy. I think over 17 million people have viewed it at this point. It went viral. Over 1 million people have commented on it. The left went nuts. But they knew that it was true. It struck a chord with America because we are feeling it. As a single parent, a working parent, I work hard to provide for my daughter, to give her the best that I possibly can. I sacrifice for her. And to have the government spending trillions of dollars on waste, literally, and treating us like their personal piggy bank, where our economy is now going through the roof with inflation, and average working class families like ours literally are feeling it at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in the most basic areas that we feel every day in our life, and then having to figure out what we're going to do with schooling, because the public school that we pay for isn't even available. It's just unbelievable. That's not the America I grew up in. That's not the America that I want for my daughter to grow up in. And so that's what motivates me every day to fight for these values.
I was going to say, that you're saying that it's not the America you want your daughter to grow up in, but you're out there making change. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that you're actually doing something about it. And that's exactly what this show is all about. You have the right, the freedom, the power to be the change that you want to see in the world, and you embody that. So, if people want to find out more, they want to support you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so my website is tinaramirez.com, so it's really easy. And they can always email me at tina@tinaramirez.com too. Just one of the things that I did last year in the middle of the pandemic was I was working with these children in Iraq. And so we took these lessons that we had helped with the teachers develop in all of the different countries where I worked over there, Iraq, Morocco, Lebanon, a number of countries, and we turned them into children's books. And this year, with everything that's happened in our schools, I never thought that I'd have to teach these fundamental freedoms here again. And yet that's what I've been doing. So I wrote a series of children's books, and I've been, this is just one of them, A Common Goal, which is about a boy that's playing soccer.
I love that.
And they teach our basic idea of religious freedom, of freedom of conscience, of speech. And when we've seen parents literally being doxxed for speaking up for basic freedom, for speaking out against Marxism, it's time that we do need to reinstill these values in our schools. And so I've been meeting with school districts and talking to them, talking to parents about, hey, these are alternatives. If they want to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion and all these buzzwords that they use, teach them our founding values and how we've actually found true diversity and respect for people of all different backgrounds and beliefs around the world, and how we've done it, because I've done it in all these countries.
Right.
And it's worked. So when I see what's happening in our schools today, I know that doesn't work.
Right.
And so that's why I did this last year, was to provide those resources to parents so that they would be able to, in their communities, fight back and say there is a better way, and it's built on the values that have worked in our country that have allowed us to have this freedom. So that's, they can go to TinaRamirez.com, and I'm happy to share more of the work that I do at Hardwired Global with them as well. But thank you for your time and for letting me share. I hope it's inspiring, that the stories and the things that we've been able to do around the rest of the world just give me hope that if we can do this in Iraq, where they have literally hit rock bottom, we have every reason to fight for this, and we can do it here.
Yep. Well, and that's, you're absolutely right. This is so inspiring, everything that you're doing and everything that you're fighting for still for the future. So, praying for you, excited for you for this next step. So thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We are here in Dallas at the Real News Communications Network studios. And don't forget, you have the right, the freedom, the power to be the change you want to see in the world. We'll see you next week.
You have the right to inspire.